Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are diving into the fascinating concept in pathophysiology, where in this video I'm just going to talk about atrophy, hypertrophy, hyperplasia, and metaplasia. In my subsequent videos I'm going to talk about neoplasia, dysplasia, and the forms of hypertrophy and hyperplasia, so watch out. So let's get started. So first, let's talk about hypertrophy. Let's look at the definition for hypertrophy. So hypertrophy is an increase in individual cell size that results in an enlargement of functioning tissue mass. Take note, hypertrophy increases the cell's functional component, which leads to greater metabolic demand and energy needs. So imagine you are at the gym. So let's take this person as you are at the gym lifting some weight. Now as time goes by, your muscles start to get bigger and stronger. Now this increase in muscle cell is called the hypertrophy. So this is the cell here. As you start to lift this weight, these cells start to get bigger and stronger, and this is what we call the hypertrophy. Let's take a clinical example, but before that, take note of this. Hypertrophy is when the cells in the tissue or organ increases in size, not the organ or the tissue itself. It's the cells that is within the tissue or organ which is increasing in size. So one clinical example is the heart, which is in response to high blood pressure. So the heart muscle has to work harder to pump blood against the higher pressure, which is leading to the thickening of the heart muscle, known as the cardiac hypertrophy. So the cardiac hypertrophy is an example of hypertrophy. Let's look at our next term. Let's talk about atrophy. Now, atrophy is the opposite of hypertrophy. Let's look at the definition for atrophy. Now, atrophy is the cellular adaptation. It's the cellular adaptation in which the cells changes to smaller size in response to changes in metabolic requirements or their environment. So just think of a plant which is in a dry season environment. What happens to it when it starts to lack water? You will see that the plant itself, or the stem of the plant or the leaves, start to shrink, leading to the reduction in the size of the tissue or the organ of the leaves. Right? So let's take a clinical example. So just think of a person who has had a cast on their leg for several weeks. Now when the cast comes off, the leg's muscle are seen smaller and weaker due to it being not used. And this condition is what we call the muscle atrophy. And this is an example of atrophy. So you can see this cell here, right? This is the cell here. This is the normal cell, and the cells start to shrink due to it not being used for some time. And there's a muscle, not being used. This atrophied muscle, and there's a normal muscle here. Now let's look at our next term. Now metaplasia is where things get a bit more interesting. It's very, very interesting thing. Now let's look at the definition. Metaplasia is the replacement of one cell type by another cell type. So, metaplasia is when one cell type changes into another type, and this changes is not normal for the tissue. So, it's like if you had a group of factory workers who had suddenly switched roles and started doing different jobs. So, you're having a group of factory workers and suddenly they have switched roles and started doing different jobs. That's what metaplasia is. And these changes is normally happens as a response to some kind of stress or injury. So let's take an example. A clinical example is in GERD, which is gastroesophageal reflux disease, where we know that in the where we know that the esophagus, the cells there is squamous epithelium cells. So the squamous epithelium cells is the cells that is located or present at the esophagus. Now, when the esophageal sphincter start to get weak, there's an acid, that's the stomach acid, start to reflux into the lower esophagus. Now, this acid start to irritate the lower esophageal cells, causing inflammation of the esophagus. Now, when this acid start to be there for a very long time and not being treated, these lower esophageal cells, which have the cells as squamous epithelium cells, which is the normal cells, start to change to columnar stomach-like cells. And this is an example of metaplasia. Now, I'll give you another example. An example is in smokers. The normal cells lining the airway, which we know is to be the ciliated columnar cells. The ciliated columnar cells can change into squamous cells. And this is just an adaptive response to the constant irritation from the smoke, known as the squamous metaplasia. The squamous metaplasia. Now, finally, let's talk about hyperplasia. Now, hyperplasia is when there is an increase in the number of cells in a tissue or organ, leading to its enlargement. So you have to just take note. Now, you can see hypertrophy here. This is hypertrophy and this is hyperplasia. You can see hypertrophy is just the increase in the size of the cell, where hyperplasia is the increase in the number of the cells. So here, there's no increase in the size of the cell, just the number of the cell just increases. And this normally happens in cells that are capable of undergoing mitosis. So you have to take note of that. So a clinical example is the enlargement of the prostate gland in older men, a condition known as the benign prostatic hyperplasia. Now, in this condition, there is an increase in the number of the prostate glands or the prostate cells, leading to the enlargement of the gland, which causes some urinary symptoms. Very, very understandable. And you can see something on the skin like this. This is an example of hyperplasia. Now, let's recap what we just talked about. So take note of this. Hypertrophy is just the cells getting bigger. Atrophy is just the cells being shrink metaplasia is just the cells changing its type. And lastly, hyperplasia is the cells being increased in numbers. So understanding this concept will help you to understand how our bodies just respond to some different kinds of conditions and stresses. So if you found this explanation helpful, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. Share this video with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for more easy to understand explanation on complex topics like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.